Hello everyone! Today I just want to gush over the best books I read in 2021 because there have been so many horrible things going on this year and I want to end it in a positive way. Maybe you'll get inspired to read one of those, so here we go, my top 10 best books of 2021. Number 10, Die Verwandlung or Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I had to read one of Kafka's novels when I was in high school and I hated it, but now that I study German literature in university, I had to give him a second chance and I was pleasantly surprised. The protagonist's story about how he wakes up one day and finds himself transformed into a giant insect was expectedly weird, yet surprisingly heartbreaking. There are a lot of different directions the plot of the book can be interpreted in, and for me, the reaction of the protagonist's family towards his transformation was the most interesting aspect of this novella. Number 9, Demian by Hermann Hesse. I picked this book up because of the connection it has to the Wings album by BTS, and I'm really glad I read it because of them. There are so many themes and things to dissect that I found myself thinking about it a lot afterwards, and I will definitely reread it someday. Demian is the story of a boy who learns that the world is not black and white. It's a story about growing up and finding one's true self, including the dark sides. For my fellow armies, I recommend this book even more because it's so much fun going through the references BTS makes to the novel, especially in their music video and overall concept of blood, sweat and tears. Number 8, Kim Jiyoung, born 1982 by Namjoon. This is a story about the life and everyday struggles of an ordinary woman in South Korea from childhood until motherhood. It's disheartening knowing she is supposed to be an average woman, and sadly there are a lot of things she goes through female readers will relate to, regardless of the country they are living in. It's a very important book in my opinion that sheds light on everyday sexism and the often overlooked struggles of womanhood. Number 7, 1984 and Animal Farm by George Orwell. I know these are two books, but it's my list and I make my own rules. 1984, many of you will know it already I'm sure, is a dystopian novel about totalitarianism, extreme surveillance and the role of language and facts which can be manipulated by a totalitarian regime. This aspect was the most interesting for me actually. I really enjoyed the ideas about the power of language Orwell discusses here. Animal Farm I even enjoyed more reading than 1984. This novella serves as a very clever allegory for the history of the Soviet Union. It follows a bunch of animals who overthrow their farmer and take control of the land. The idea is that now every animal can be equal, but very soon the pigs start to take control and brainwash the animals which are beneath them. I read Animal Farm after I had read In Order to Live by Park Yeon-mi, the autobiography about her escape from North Korea, in which she talked about her experience reading Animal Farm and how she was surprised how well this book depicted the communist dictatorship she escaped from. And so I was able to see the events in the novella from this new point of view, which was really cool. Animal Farm definitely didn't lose its relevancy today. Number 6, The Boy, the Fox, the Horse and the Mole. This is a children's book written and illustrated by Charlie Maxey. You can read through it in literally 15 to 20 minutes, but you'll find yourself coming back to these pages again and again because every single sentence in this book is just a quote you could hang up on the wall. It's very simple in its premise, just the titular for characters hanging out and having a conversation together, but in the simplicity it unfolds wonderful depth and emotions, and those are supported by the amazing illustrations. Okay, now we are getting into my absolute favorites of this year. Number 5, My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This novel tackles the very heavy topic of teacher-student relationships. It is told in two timelines, one in which the protagonist is just a girl during a time the relationship with her teacher starts, and the other one takes place nearly 20 years later, I believe, when allegations of sexual harassment and abuse against this teacher start piling up, and the protagonist is forced to rethink her point of view on what has happened to her. The story is incredibly enthralling, yet disgusting. The events surely stick with you a bit, even after you close the book. However, it is absolutely worth it. To be in this girl or woman's head and see the events through her eyes was very intense and also really frustrating, and it's a topic we should talk about a lot more. Number 4, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Rebecca follows a young woman who meets a richer, older man and marries him. When he takes her to his mansion, Mandalay, everything in this place reminds her of his late wife Rebecca. She feels as though she's not enough, less pretty, less interesting, less clever, and less welcoming than Rebecca was. She becomes obsessed with this idea of the woman before her, and then a very interesting plot twist takes place. The twist itself was obvious from the beginning, but how the events shift after that makes up for it. The novel is really creepy at times, and and the atmosphere of Mandalay was very well crafted, and I absolutely loved the perspective of the protagonist. A bit like my Dark Vanessa, it was frustrating at times because I really wanted to scream at her to leave this place, but her naive and ultimately female perspective of a woman in the 1930s was so fascinating. Number 3, Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This was my first Stephen King novel I ever read, and I heard Pet Sematary was a good way to start with him, so I picked it up, and I can absolutely recommend starting with this one if you're not used to reading horror, because through most of the novel I'd classify it more as a drama than a horror story. I was hooked pretty much from the beginning by the family we follow. I knew that horrible things would be happening to them, and I pretty much guessed everything that went wrong in this book before it happened, but that didn't take away from my enjoyment at all. King successfully made me care about this family, only to destroy me in the third act of the book, and through this entire novel, the exploration of grief and death was astounding to me. It was so thought-provoking, and I loved to see how he used the horror elements to explore the trauma of grief. Number 2, Know My Name, a memoir by Chanel Miller. Know My Name is the autobiography of Chanel Miller, in which she writes about her story of being a victim to sexual assault and the aftermath of it all, both in terms of the court case and her personal story. I was listening to the audiobook, which was narrated by the author herself, which I can absolutely recommend. The events in the book felt so real and raw, given the fact that she told them to me directly. There were many moments where you could feel her emotions bleeding out of her, which was really captivating. This is one of the books that everyone should read. It's amazingly written and just so fucking important. And if you don't have the time to read the whole book, I recommend reading her victim impact statement. I have it linked below. Here are some honorable mentions that didn't make my list, but I wanted to mention them anyway. Die kleinste gemeinsame Wirklichkeit by Mighty Nguyen Kim. This is a non-fiction book of a German YouTuber, journalist, and host of a science-centered TV show. She studied chemistry and focuses on science mediation. In this book, she tackled some heavily discussed scientific issues, such as vaccines, the climate crisis, or the legalization of drugs in a very rational and science-based way. This year was the perfect time to publish such a book because science-based discussions have never been more important. In Order to Live, a North Korean girl's journey to freedom by Park Yeon-mi. This is the book I mentioned before already. It's an autobiography about Yeon-mi's life in and escape from North Korea. If you want to hate this world or cry and vomit, read this book. And there are 2 short stories that I really loved. The One to Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin is about a city in which no one suffers and there is an abundance of everything, but at some point every citizen learns that in order for them to be happy, there needs to be a child kept in a dark basement to suffer endlessly. This story is also very relevant for the society we are living in today. And The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, which is about the development of a once soft-hearted man who turns into a murderer. And now my number 1 of the year is Educated by Tara Westover. This book is definitely my favorite out of the whole year. It's another autobiography, this one by Tara Westover, who writes about her upbringing in a survivalist Mormon family in rural Idaho. Her childhood was shaped by violence, fanaticism, and the belief that every worldly institution is evil. She was 17 when she set foot in a classroom for the first time, and in this book she writes about the importance of education, which turned her life around. Her academic journey alone would be fascinating, yet the most gripping thing about this book for me was her life at home and her family's dynamics. Some things that happened were so unbelievable that I couldn't put the book down. I was also deeply impressed how she was able to write about her family who did horrible things to her without demonizing her family members, but rather making the reader kind of understand or even pity them. Educated is beautifully written, thought-provoking, and absolutely gripping. It almost reads like fiction and you get through the book very easily. I will definitely reread it someday, and for anyone planning to read it, do yourself a favor and don't Google her or her family beforehand. The book is so much more enticing if you don't know what happens. Just because I want to, here are also the best movies I watched in 2021. In no particular order, number 1, Emma, directed by Autumn de Wilde. This is a new adaptation of the novel of the same name by Jane Austen. I love Jane Austen so much, and somehow I didn't watch this adaptation of Emma when it came out last year, but now I did and it was wonderful. The film understood the book as the thing that it is, a comedy, and the adaptation is really funny and witty, the performances are great, the costumes were amazing, and it was very faithful. Even though I grew up with the Gwyneth Paltrow version, which still holds a special place in my heart out of nostalgia alone, I got to say this version is better in almost every regard and just so beautiful to look at. Don't Look Up, directed by Adam McKay. This is a dark comedy that serves as an allegory for many problems we are living through right now. It was extremely frightening how real the movie felt regarding the issues it depicts, from the inability of many people to listen to scientific data, to social media culture, and the power some ignorant politicians and billionaires hold. Don't watch this movie if you're already sensitive to the crises we are living through, but at the same time it is a much needed wake-up call. And if there's one lesson the movie teaches, listen to the goddamn qualified scientists. The next movie is Snowpiercer, such a good and suspenseful movie about capitalism and classism by Bong Joon-ho, which is incredibly thought-provoking, multi-layered, and full of allegories. Next, Parasite, such a good and suspenseful movie about capitalism and classism by Bong Joon-ho, which is incredibly thought-provoking and multi-layered and full of allegories. And finally, Knives Out, such a good and suspenseful movie about classism, not by Bong Joon-ho, but Rian Johnson, which is really thought-provoking, multi-layered, and full of allegories. I really had my eat the rich face this year. Knives Out was also really funny and well acted as well. And for good measure, here are my favorite TV shows of 2021. Again, in no particular order: Squid Game, directed by Hwang Dong-hyuk. Speaking of Eat the Rich, I really enjoyed Squid Game. It was the first series I binged in a long time and I loved it. It wasn't perfect, and I get why many people voiced their opinion that it didn't deserve the hype it got, but it was so very well executed, from the production design, screenwriting, performances, to themes and messages. I don't think that a second season is a good idea, but I'm still interested to see what the filmmakers will come up with. WandaVision, directed by Matt Shakman. Out of all the Marvel shows that came out this year, WandaVision is my favorite. The concept of this show is so unique, and I loved the exploration of Wanda's grief, and spoiler alert for anyone who still plans to watch the show, I loved how much she was allowed to be the villain. It was really funny too. I want Marvel to take such creative risks more often. And lastly, my favorite show that I watched this year was Fleabag, directed by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. It is dearly beloved by so many, but still very underappreciated in my opinion, so please, if you haven't already, watch Fleabag. It only consists of 2 seasons, made of 6 episodes each, with a runtime of maybe 20 minutes, so you can easily watch it in a day or two. Fleabag is so refreshing and unique in every way imaginable. I love the use of the fourth wall break in the show especially. I love every character, though not as the people they are, because most of them are horrible, except for Claire. I would protect her with my life, but I love them for the complexity of them all. I hated Olivia Colman's character with a passion. Every time she was on screen, I wanted to punch her. She did such a good job at making her character hateable. Season 2 was somehow even better than Season 1. The priest was such a good addition to the show. I love Fleabag's character development. I love Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I love the themes the show tackles. I love the humor, but I also love how the show made me cry and just in every way emote. So yeah, go watch Fleabag. That's it for today. I hope this video wasn't boring and that you got inspired perhaps to pick up a book I mentioned or to watch a movie or show. Please tell me your favorite books, movies, and shows in the comments, and if you already watched or read something I mentioned here, tell me your thoughts on it. Did you like it or did you hate something on my lists? Stay safe, and I sincerely hope that 2022 will be a better year for all of us. Happy New Year, everyone!